Well, ANC presidential hopeful Lindiwe Sisulu has and is one of those who've publicly called for President Cyril Ramaphosa to step aside until he's been cleared of any wrongdoing with regards to the Phala Phala farm scandal. Sisulu spoke exclusively to Newzroom Afrika's Kathy Muhlahlana this week, and here are some of the things she had to say about the ANC and about Ramaphosa.
We can work our way through anybody who stands and offers us a different solution. I hope that, there are just so many other people who would be able to stand and say that they would be able to lead the country. And I think the country does need change. It is important that we understand that there are other cadres in the organization. They have different ways of doing things, and that's the nature of politics. I was asked if I would serve in President Ramaphosa's cabinet, and I said no.
Well, as you would have seen, the presidency has slammed the calls for Ramaphosa to step aside and has said that sitting cabinet ministers should know and do better. For more on this, we speak to political analyst, Professor Sethulego Matebesi. Prof, thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining us on our program this morning. We're about 6 weeks away from the elective conference in December. It does seem inevitable that we would start to see some of the ANC's internal contestations sort of spill over and become governance issues almost. What are your thoughts on the recent calls that we've been seeing by cabinet ministers on the president to actually step aside?
Hi, good morning, Ntokoza, and good morning to your viewers. Very interesting times in South African politics, but expectedly so. Most of us knew that the armchair against the president will be up a few weeks before the elective conference of the African National Congress. And one should also look at the critique against the president, not necessarily from his predecessors, but also from his own ministers. I strongly believe, and I state this with the absolute respect, that a minister like Ms. Sisulu would have raised the issues that she raised in the manner that she does 2 months into being appointed as a minister. So one should understand that context. Some of the ministers and those who raise these issues against the president has absolutely nothing to lose. In fact, I strongly believe that Minister Sisulu was looking for that opportunity that the president should try and get rid of her, to try and actually once again garner support for her stance. But perhaps this is the outcome of a vibrant democracy, but it has been unheard for in the past, where ministers openly will lambast their own leader.
I don't know if you would have heard there in that bite that we played, Professor, Tourism Minister Lindiwe Sisulu going as far as to say that she would actually decline any sort of deployment by President Cyril Ramaphosa in his cabinet if he does not, in fact, step aside. What do you make of that? Because it does appear to be somewhat of a principled stance to say that I refuse to work with someone who may or may not be connected to these allegations of corruption. But at the same time, this is someone who served as Minister of Defense and Minister of Public Administration during the Zuma years, under former President Jacob Zuma's administration, at the height of the Nkandla scandal. So what do we make of these pronouncements that appear to be, principled? But when we track back and we look at, historical context, this particular individual hasn't always taken up the principled stance.
Yes, I strongly believe it is very good for our democracy when you got leaders who take a principled stance, but then they need to be consistent. And this does not only apply to Minister Sisulu. Many of us has been complaining during President Jacob Zuma's era to say that here is President Cyril Ramaphosa. He was part of President Jacob Zuma's presidency? Why did he not take a principled stance by highlighting some of these things? But I know you're part of an organization, and maybe he raised whatever issues he had within the African National Congress, within government structures, and not in the way that Minister Sisulu is doing. But I think, one should strongly understand that it might be a strategy from Minister Sisulu to say, you dare invite me, I'm going to embarrass you. And the only way that I can do that is to show you that I would not want to be part of a cabinet led by somebody that in her view, it's perhaps tainted into controversy and all other issues that perhaps cannot be aligned with ethical governance.
What do you make of the presidency's response to, the calls that have been made by cabinet ministers? We heard there the presidency spokesperson Vincent Magwenya talking about, there being an established decorum between the president and his cabinet ministers, and really requiring a level of professionalism when dealing with issues where, there's contestation. What do you make of that response, given that, like I said, we're leading closer and closer to this elective conference? We're likely to see more high-ranking, not only ANC members, but high-ranking cabinet ministers come out and perhaps make similar calls. So that response from the presidency, is that the right way to go? Is that the right way to handle something like this playing out in such a public space?
No, the presidency does have advisors. The president, in his personal capacity, might even have people who advise him. But fact of the matter is, President Cyril Ramaphosa is there because of the African National Congress. And in the past, if situations like these happened, you would have heard the Secretary General of the African National Congress speaking on behalf of Luthuli House to protect the image of the president, because the president is the face of the African National Congress, although once again the others will bring in the whole notion of a separation of power. But we all know that President Cyril Ramaphosa is the leader of this country based on his position within the African National Congress. And you would have expected the African National Congress by now, whether the chairperson or even the acting Secretary General, to come and say, no, we are not going to allow this. Yes, we may have open contestation, a democratic way of elective leaders, but this is definitely, because at the end of the day, it does have a reputational risk for the government and for the African National Congress. And it seems as if the president is flying solo. From time to time, you will have some muted responses from the Minister of Transport, Fikile Mbalula, taking a stance to protect, or at least indicate his support for the president. But now it seems as if the presidency had to step in. Otherwise, the dominant narrative that has been peddled in the media would have taken precedence, and that is the narrative or the discourse that the president had to step aside. He has not been charged. Investigations are still continuing. I'm not a spokesperson for the presidency, but that's how I understand this very controversial step-aside rules of the African National Congress.
Well, Prof, thank you so much for your time and for coming onto our program this morning and sharing your insights. That's a political analyst, Professor Sethulego Matebesi.